The last hour on Vreth Prime was chaos painted in fire and desperation. The planet's surface cracked open, spewing molten rock into a sky that burned with the light of a dying sun. Buildings that had stood for thousands of years collapsed into rubble. Ancient Vreth cities, monuments to civilization that had endured longer than humanity had existed, crumbled to dust in minutes. Jiwoo ran through the evacuation zone, her lungs burning from the superheated air even through her protective mask. Behind her, a team of human volunteers helped elderly Vreth who could not move quickly enough. The ground shook with each step. Somewhere behind them, the roar of collapsing infrastructure sounded like the planet itself screaming. Empress Kalinara stood at the last boarding ramp, still refusing to leave. The ancient ruler helped load families onto ships, her movement slow but determined. Jiwoo reached her and physically grabbed the Empress's arm. No more waiting. No more nobility. They were leaving now. The Empress looked at Jiwoo with those deep, sad eyes and nodded. Together they ran for the final shuttle. Behind them, the evacuation zone collapsed into a massive sinkhole. The ground simply opened up and swallowed buildings, equipment, everything. If they had waited another 30 seconds, they would have fallen with it. The shuttle launched just as a solar flare swept across the surface below. Jiwoo watched through the viewport as the planet that had been the Vreth homeworld for billions of years died. Oceans turned to steam. Continents broke apart. The atmosphere ignited, but the shuttle climbed toward orbit, toward the massive fleet of human ships waiting in space. And inside those ships were 4 billion Vreth, every single one. Not a single life left behind. The number flashed across displays throughout the fleet. 1,000, 100% evacuation. Complete success. For a moment, the communication channels went silent. Every human crew member, every ship captain, every pilot stared at those numbers in disbelief. They had actually done it. The impossible thing. The thing the galaxy had said could not be done. Then someone started cheering. The sound spread through the fleet like a wave. Exhausted crews who had not slept in days cried and laughed and hugged each other. Ships sounded their horns in victory. The communication channels exploded with celebration. Admiral Kyung-soo sat on his bridge and let out a breath he felt like he had been holding for days. Around him, his crew wept openly. They had lost friends. They had lost ships. But they had saved everyone. Bora collapsed over her navigation console, her body finally giving out from exhaustion. Medical teams rushed to help her. She had pushed herself beyond human limits, had kept working when her brain should have shut down. But she had guided ships through impossible routes until the very end. She had earned her rest. Captain Yuna floated in her escape pod. Her command ship having finally died during the last evacuation run, she had ordered her crew to evacuate, had stayed at the controls until every system failed, then had ejected at the last possible moment. Now she drifted among the stars, watching the fleet through her pod's small window, and felt a pride that made her chest ache. The hyperspace routes collapsed exactly as predicted, right at the 42-hour mark. Reality sealed itself, those dangerous pathways through folded space simply ceasing to exist. If the evacuation had taken even 1 hour longer, thousands of ships would have been trapped, destroyed. But humanity had made it, just barely. But barely was enough. The final casualty count came through over the next hours as ships reported in. 3,847 human ships lost, 41,203 crew members dead, thousands more injured, some critically. Taeyang and Hyojin were in medical isolation with radiation poisoning. Jinho needed surgery to repair damage from multiple crashes. Sunhee had worked herself into a collapse. The cost had been heavy. Every human felt it. But when they looked at the 4 billion Vreth alive in their ships, when they saw the families reunited, the children who would grow up because of humanity's sacrifice, the cost seemed bearable. The fleet made its way to the evacuation staging area, a region of space where temporary habitats had been constructed. The Vreth would live there while permanent homes were found for them. Other species in the galaxy, shamed by humanity's example, offered planets and resources. The Vreth would survive. They would rebuild. They had a future because humans had given them one. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session. Every representative attended. The chamber that had once echoed with mockery and doubt now sat in complete silence as Ambassador Hana entered. She looked older than before, worn by the stress of the evacuation, but she walked with her head high. The council voted unanimously to honor humanity with the Eternal Star, the highest recognition the galaxy could give. It was awarded only once in galactic history before, to a species that had prevented a black hole collision that would have destroyed half the galaxy. Humanity was now among those legends, but Hana declined the award on humanity's behalf. She said that they had not done this for recognition. They had done it because 400 years ago, one person had valued human lives enough to sacrifice everything. Humanity had simply returned that gift. The debt was paid, but more than that, a bond was created that could never be broken. The Vreth officially declared an eternal alliance with humanity. Empress Kalinara offered her species' entire archive of knowledge, technology developed over millions of years, hyperspace theories that would revolutionize travel, medical advances that would extend human lifespans, energy systems that would power human civilization for centuries. But more than technology, the Vreth offered friendship. The two species, so different yet connected by sacrifice, would grow together. Kithara, the young Vreth child who had been so frightened during the evacuation, found Jiwoo weeks later during a diplomatic ceremony. The little girl had learned some human language, enough to thank the commander for finding her family. She gave Jiwoo a gift, a crystal that had been carved by Vreth artisans over centuries. It represented eternal gratitude. Jiwoo accepted the gift and knelt down to the child's level. She said that Kithara and all the other young Vreth represented the future, a future that was possible because people had chosen to help each other. That was the lesson Jiwoo hoped the child would remember. Not the fire and fear, but the moment when strangers became family through shared struggle. Across the galaxy, the story of the evacuation spread. It became legend. Schools taught it. Songs celebrated it. Artists created memorials. But the greatest impact was political. A dozen species that had been hostile to humanity suddenly sought diplomatic relations. The idea that humans would sacrifice so much for an old debt made them desirable allies. Who would not want friends who honored their promises so completely? Some of the older, more cynical species tried to dismiss it as a political stunt, but the evidence was undeniable. The casualty lists were real. The destroyed ships were documented. The sacrifice had been genuine. On Earth and all human colonies, monuments were erected. Simple black stone pillars with names, 41,203 names. Every person who had died to honor humanity's debt. They were called the Guardians of the Crossing. Those who had given everything so others might live. Daehyun attended the dedication of one such monument on Earth. He read names he recognized, people he had commanded, friends he had lost. The military strategist who had planned the impossible operation stood in front of those names and wept. They had succeeded, but the cost of success was written in stone before him. Taeyang recovered from his radiation exposure. The doctors said he would live, though he would deal with health issues for the rest of his life. He did not complain. When reporters asked if he regretted his sacrifice, he looked confused by the question. Of course not. People needed those hyperspace anchors to work. Someone had to fix them. That someone had been him. It was that simple. 6 months after the evacuation, a joint human Vreth station was established in neutral space. It became a symbol of their alliance, a place where both species worked together. Young Vreth learned human languages. Human children studied Vreth history. A new culture began to emerge, born from tragedy but building towards something beautiful. Admiral Kyungsoo retired from military service and became an ambassador. He spent his remaining years fostering relationships between species, teaching the lesson he had learned during the evacuation. That honor mattered, that promises were sacred, that the impossible was just a challenge waiting for people brave enough to try. Captain Yuna got a new ship, bigger and better than her old one. She named it Korath's Gift in honor of the Vreth who had started everything 400 years ago. The ship flew routes between human and Vreth space, carrying supplies, messages, and friendship. Bora became the leading expert on hyperspace navigation in the galaxy. Her theories revolutionized travel, but she never forgot those 42 hours when she had guided ships through breaking reality. Sometimes in her dreams she still saw those routes collapsing, still felt the weight of millions of lives depending on her calculations. Dr. Sun-hee continued her medical work, now incorporating Vreth techniques she had learned during the evacuation. She trained a new generation of doctors in improvised medicine. Admiral Kyung-soo stood on the bridge of the flagship Perseverance, staring at displays that showed a situation spiraling toward disaster. He was 56 years old, had commanded fleets in 3 different conflicts, and had always made the hard decisions when they needed to be made. Right now he faced the hardest decision of his life. The Vreth sun was dying faster than predicted. What should have been a gradual collapse over months was happening in days. Solar flares erupted from the surface, massive waves of radiation and energy that swept across the system. 3 evacuation zones had been completely destroyed by flares in the last hour, thousands of Vreth dead, dozens of human ships vaporized. 6 hours remained in the safe window for hyperspace travel. 800 million Vreth still needed evacuation. The numbers did not work anymore. They could not save everyone. Admiral Kyung-soo pulled up the command protocols. There were procedures for this, rules for when to cut losses and save what you could. He could give the order right now to begin withdrawing human ships. They could take the 3 billion already saved and get them to safety. It would be the largest rescue operation in history. Humanity would be celebrated, but 800 million Vreth would die. His hand hovered over the communication controls. One order. That was all it would take. Withdraw, save the crews, save the rescued, let the rest go. It was the practical choice, the smart choice, the choice that would keep more humans alive. He thought about his daughter, safe back on Earth. He thought about what he would tell her about this day. Would he tell her that Daddy made the smart choice? That Daddy cut his losses? That Daddy decided some lives were worth saving and others were acceptable casualties? Before he could give the order, a message came through from Earth. It was Ambassador Hana. Her face on the screen looked old and tired, but her voice was steel. She said that she had received recommendations to authorize withdrawal. She was rejecting those recommendations. No human ship would retreat. They had made a promise. They would keep it. Hana said something else, something that cut through all of Kyung-soo's military training and tactical thinking. She said that 400 years ago, Korath had not calculated acceptable losses. He had not weighed the odds. He had simply acted with honor, knowing it would cost him everything. Humanity would do the same. The transmission ended. Kyung-soo stood in silence for a long moment. Then he opened channels to every human ship in the system. He told them the situation. He told them the sun was collapsing faster than predicted. He told them that staying was almost certainly suicide for many of them. Then he asked who would stay. Every single ship responded with affirmative. Not one vessel withdrew. Kyung-soo felt something break and rebuild inside his chest. He gave new orders. Every ship, including his flagship, would be repurposed for evacuation. The Perseverance was a military vessel, not designed for passengers. They would make it work anyway. Down on Vreth Prime, Tai Yang and a young engineer named Hyo-jin worked on the planet's surface in conditions that should have killed them. The hyperspace anchors, devices that stabilize the unstable routes, were failing from radiation exposure. Without them, the routes would collapse early and trap everyone. Tae Yang and Hyo-jin wore radiation suits that were supposed to protect them for maybe 30 minutes. They had been out here for 3 hours. The suits were failing. Radiation counters screamed warnings, but the anchors needed manual calibration. Delicate work that could not be done remotely. Hyo-jin's hands shook as she rewired systems. She was 27. Had been an engineer for only 5 years. This should have been way above her skill level. But she worked with steady focus, connecting components while her radiation counter clicked like angry insects. Tae Yang worked beside her, his vision starting to blur from radiation exposure. He knew they were both taking doses that would probably kill them eventually. Cancer in 10 years, maybe 20 if they were lucky. But right now, 10 years from now did not matter. Right now, 800 million people needed these anchors to work. They finished the repairs. The anchors stabilized. Tae Yang and Hyo-jin stumbled back to their shuttle, helped by crew members who looked horrified at their radiation readings. They would spend the next month in medical isolation, but they had bought time for the evacuation to continue. In orbit, Bora was navigating ships through hyperspace routes that were literally breaking apart around them. Space itself was fracturing. She could see it on her instruments, reality coming unglued at the seams. Ships entered hyperspace and sometimes did not come out where they should. Some appeared light years off course, some did not appear at all. But Bora kept calculating routes, finding the thin threads of stable space that still existed. She routed ships through gaps that existed for seconds. She guided transports around tiers in reality that would have swallowed them whole. Her mind was working at its absolute limit, and she knew that even one mistake would kill thousands. A transport carrying 50,000 Vreth appeared off course, tumbling out of hyperspace inside a debris field. The ship was going to collide with wreckage. Bora saw it happening, calculated the trajectory, and realized there was nothing the transport could do. Its maneuvering thrusters were not strong enough to avoid collision, but a human military ship was nearby. Bora opened channels and sent navigation data. The military ship moved into position and used its own thrusters to push the transport clear. The military ship took the collision instead, its hull breaching, its crew evacuating to escape pods. 15 human crew members died to save 50,000 Vreth they had never met. Captain Yuna's ship was falling apart. She had pushed it beyond all reasonable limits. Systems were failing. Hull plates were buckling. But she kept loading passengers. Her ship was designed for 5,000 people maximum. She had 11,000 Vreth packed into every available space. The ship barely made it to hyperspace. Inside the unstable routes, reality bent around them. Yuna held the controls with everything she had, fighting to keep the ship on course while space itself tried to tear them apart. Her crew worked frantically, repairing systems as they failed, manually operating controls when automation quit. They made it through, barely. When they emerged on the other side, safe at the evacuation staging area, Yuna collapsed in her command chair. Her ship would never fly again. But 11,000 Vreth were alive because of it. Jinho recovered enough to fly despite his doctor's protests, led rescue missions into the worst zones, places where solar flares had cut off evacuation routes, places where Vreth were trapped in collapsing cities. He flew through radiation storms that cooked his ship's hull. He landed in areas where the ground was literally melting. On one run, his ship took a direct hit from a solar flare. Half his systems went dead. His co-pilot was badly burned, but Jinho kept the ship together through sheer will and flew out with 200 Vreth packed into a cargo bay designed for spare parts. The Galactic Council watched it all. They watched humans sacrifice ships, crews, their health, their lives. They watched a species that was young and small compared to the ancient civilizations do something none of them had believed possible. Some species started sending more than just observation ships. The crystalline beings of Shard-9 sent medical vessels. The Kalmorics, who had mocked humanity, sent supply ships with parts and fuel. A dozen other species contributed what they could, but it was humanity doing the impossible work. It was human ships flying through deadly conditions. It was human crews working beyond exhaustion. It was human sacrifice making the numbers work. 4 hours remained. 400 million Vreth still needed evacuation. The sun was entering its final death spiral. The planet was beginning to break apart. Tectonic plates shifting, oceans boiling away. Jiwoo worked in the last functioning evacuation zone, helping Vreth families board the final transports. Empress Kalinara was there, refusing to leave until every citizen was safe. The old ruler stood at the loading ramps, touching each Vreth who passed, giving them courage. Jiwoo approached the Empress and said she needed to evacuate now. The planet was dying. Kalinara refused. She was the ruler. She would be the last to leave. Around them, the ground shook. Buildings collapsed in the distance. The sky turned angry red from the dying sun. Human crews worked frantically to load the last refugees. 3 hours remained. 200 million Vreth left. The math was getting impossible again. But humanity had stopped paying attention to impossible math. Admiral Kyung-soo ordered his flagship to land. The massive military vessel, never designed to enter atmosphere, descended toward Vreth Prime. It shook and groaned, but it landed. They began loading Vreth directly onto a warship, packing them into cargo bays, crew quarters, even weapons storage. All across the planet, every human ship that could still fly did the same. They landed one final time. They took every Vreth they could fit. They launched knowing their ships might not survive the strain. 2 hours remained. 100 million Vreth left. Every ship committed. Every crew giving everything. The final evacuation began. The sky above Vreth Prime turned dark with ships. Thousands upon thousands of human vessels descended through the atmosphere in waves. They landed in fields, on rooftops, in city squares, anywhere there was space. The ground shook with the thunder of engines. The air filled with the screech of metal and the hiss of airlocks opening. Dr. Sunhee stood in the medical bay of a converted cargo hauler, watching as the first Vreth refugees came aboard. She was 45 years old, had worked in frontier hospitals for 20 years, and thought she had seen everything. She was wrong. The Vreth were tall and moved with a grace that seemed strange in their panic. Their biology was different from humans in ways that her medical scanners were still trying to understand. The first family that came through had a child, maybe 8 years old in human terms. The little one was crying, clutching a small object that looked like a crystal. Her name was Kithara, and she was terrified. Sunhee knelt down and spoke softly, trying to comfort the child even though they did not share a language. Sometimes kindness needed no translation, but within hours problems began. Vreth biology reacted badly to human ship environments. The air mixture was slightly wrong. The gravity was too heavy. The lighting hurt their eyes. Vreth started getting sick, their bodies going into shock. Sunhee's medical bay overflowed with patients. She worked until her hands shook with exhaustion, improvising treatments, mixing medicines in ways that were probably illegal but kept people alive. Across the planet, similar scenes played out on thousands of ships. Human crews scrambled to adjust their systems, to make their vessels habitable for passengers they had never carried before. Engineers worked miracles with spare parts and desperation. Life support systems designed for 50 people now supported 500. Water recyclers ran at triple capacity. Air scrubbers worked overtime. Pilot Jinho flew a small, fast ship that darted between the larger transports. He was 31, cocky, and one of the best pilots in the human fleet. His job was to reach the difficult places, the evacuation zones that the big ships could not access. He flew into canyons where the walls scraped his hull. He landed on platforms that were barely larger than his ship. He pulled Vreth from collapsing buildings and dying districts. On his 6th run of the day, Jinho's ship took damage from falling debris. His right engine stuttered and died. Any sane pilot would have retreated for repairs. Instead, Jinho adjusted his flight pattern and kept going. He could fly on one engine. He had done it before. There were people down there who needed him. Captain Yuna coordinated the massive operation from orbit, her command ship serving as a hub for thousands of vessels. Her screens showed organized chaos, ships landing, loading, launching, traffic patterns that made her head hurt, near collisions every few minutes, and through it all the constant pressure of time running out. Daehyun had divided Vreth Prime into sectors. Each sector had a target number, a population that needed to be evacuated. The numbers updated constantly on Yuna's displays. Green meant a sector was on schedule. Yellow meant they were falling behind. Red meant they were in serious trouble. Too many sectors were turning red. Bora worked at her navigation station, creating flight paths faster than the ships could follow them. Her fingers danced across controls, her mind racing ahead of the present moment. She was routing ships through windows of opportunity that lasted seconds. A gap in the traffic, a break in the weather, a moment when two descent paths would not intersect and cause disaster. 18 hours into the evacuation, a crisis emerged. A massive Vreth city of 200 million people was trapped behind a magnetic field collapse. The city sat in a valley, and the planet's failing magnetic field had created a crushing pressure zone around it. Any ship that entered would be squeezed like an egg. The structural integrity would fail. The ship would implode, the city was going to die. 200 million Vreth had no way out. Yuna stared at the data, feeling sick. She had lost sectors before, places where they simply could not reach everyone in time, but never this many. Never all at once. She started calculating how to redistribute ships to save more people elsewhere, trying to salvage what she could from the disaster. Then Jinho's voice crackled over the communication channel. He said he had an idea. It was crazy and would probably kill him, but it might work. He explained that if ships entered the magnetic field zone at precisely the right angle and speed, they could create a corridor. The magnetic forces would crush the first ships, but their debris would temporarily disrupt the field. Other ships could follow through the corridor before it collapsed. It was suicide for the first wave. Everyone knew it. Yuna opened her mouth to refuse, to say it was too dangerous. But before she could speak, dozens of other pilots volunteered. They would be the first wave. They would create the corridor. Jinho led them in. His damaged ship was barely holding together, but he pushed it into the magnetic field zone anyway. The pressure hit like a hammer. His hull screamed. Alarms shrieked. His co-pilot was shouting something, but Jinho could not hear over the noise. He focused on holding the course, on staying in position just long enough. His ship broke apart around him. The last thing he saw was the corridor forming, a path through the deadly field. Then his escape pod shot clear, tumbling through space. Behind him, 17 other ships followed his path. All of them were crushed. All of their pilots ejected at the last moment. And in their sacrifice, they created a corridor that lasted 6 minutes. 6 minutes for the evacuation ships to rush through. 6 minutes to save 200 million lives. Yuna personally led the evacuation fleet through the corridor. Her hands gripped the controls so hard they hurt. Around her ship, reality seemed to bend and twist from the magnetic forces. She could see wreckage from the sacrificed ships, twisted metal that had been homes to brave pilots. She flew through their sacrifice and felt tears on her face. They saved all 200 million. Every single Vreth in that city made it out. But the cost weighed heavy. 17 ships destroyed, 34 pilots in medical bays with critical injuries. Jinho survived but would need months of recovery. When Yuna's ship cleared the corridor, she had to stop and just breathe for a moment. Around her, her crew sat in silence. They had seen what humans were willing to do to honor their word. Down on the surface, Jiwoo personally oversaw one of the most difficult evacuations, a district where Vreth families were separated, children lost from parents in the chaos. She went building to building with Vreth volunteers searching. That was when she found Kythera again, the little girl from the medical bay. The child was alone, crying, separated from her family. Jiwoo picked up the girl and promised to find her parents. She carried Kythera through the crowded evacuation zones, asking every Vreth they passed. It took 3 hours, but they found the family. The reunion was tearful and grateful. Kythera hugged Jiwoo before leaving, and the commander felt something crack in her chest. This was what they were fighting for. Not numbers on a screen, not political obligations, just families who wanted to live. 30 hours into the evacuation, they had moved 3 billion Vreth. 1 billion remained. 12 hours left on the clock. The math was getting tighter. Ships were breaking down from overuse. Crews were collapsing from exhaustion. The dying sun was becoming more unstable, throwing off solar flares that damaged ships and disrupted operations. But humanity did not stop. They pushed harder. Ships that should have been grounded for repairs kept flying. Crews worked shifts that lasted 20 hours straight. Coffee and stimulants kept people moving when their bodies wanted to quit. Sunhee's medical bay had treated over 50,000 patients. She had not slept in 2 days. Her hands shook when she worked, but she kept working. People needed her. Across the planet, similar stories played out. Human crews giving everything they had. Pilots flying on damaged ships. Engineers fixing systems with no proper tools. Medics treating injuries with improvised methods. The galaxy was watching now. Other species had sent observation ships. They watched the humans work. They watched the impossible slowly become possible. Some started sending aid, medical supplies, spare parts, even a few volunteer ships. The Galactic Council received constant updates. The representatives who had mocked humanity now sat in stunned silence. The numbers kept updating. 3.2 billion evacuated. 3.5 billion. 3.8 billion. With 8 hours remaining, humanity entered the final phase. 1 billion Vreth left to save. Every ship was committed. Every crew was exhausted. But they would not stop until every last Vreth was safe. The war room on Earth was packed with people. Military officers stood shoulder to shoulder with civilian leaders, scientists, and ship captains. Holographic displays covered every wall, showing star maps, ship inventories, and constantly updating calculations. All the numbers looked bad, really bad. Daehyun stood at the main console, his face grim as he reviewed the data one more time. He was humanity's top military strategist, a man who had planned defenses against pirate raids and coordinated supply lines across dozens of colonies. But nothing in his career had prepared him for this. 4 billion Vreth, 6 months. The math simply did not work with conventional methods. Across the room, a young man with messy hair and coffee stains on his shirt was arguing loudly with 3 senior engineers. This was Tae Yang, and he was brilliant in the way that drove traditional thinkers crazy. He saw solutions where others saw walls. Right now, he was sketching modifications on a hologram, his hands moving so fast they blurred. Dae-hyun called the room to order. The arguing stopped. Everyone turned to face him. He laid out the situation simply. Every human ship capable of carrying passengers, from military cruisers to civilian transports to old mining haulers, totaled maybe 50,000 vessels. Even packed beyond safety limits, they could move perhaps 200 million vreth per trip. They would need at least 20 trips to evacuate everyone. They had time for maybe 3. The room fell silent. Someone in the back muttered that it was hopeless. Others nodded. A few started discussing how to politely back out of the commitment. Then Tae-yang stepped forward. He said they were thinking about the problem wrong. They did not need bigger ships. They needed faster routes. He pulled up a star map and highlighted areas of unstable hyperspace, regions where reality got thin and space folded in unpredictable ways. Normal ships avoided these areas because they were dangerous, sometimes deadly. But Tae-yang explained that the Vreth had data on these regions, centuries of observations that humans lacked. If they combined Vreth navigation knowledge with human quantum fold technology, they could cut travel time by 70%. Instead of 3 trips, they could make maybe 15 or even 20. It was dangerous. Ships might be lost, but it was possible. Dae-hyun studied the proposal. He asked about casualties. Tae-yang did not sugarcoat it. They would lose ships, maybe hundreds, maybe thousands. But if they did nothing, 4 billion Vreth would die with certainty. A chance was better than no chance. The vote was called. The room divided. Some thought it was reckless. Others saw no alternative. In the end, the decision went to the World Council, and after 6 hours of heated debate, they approved the mission. Humanity would mobilize everything they had. The call went out across all human colonies, stations, and settlements. They needed ships. They needed crews. Within 48 hours, the response overwhelmed every communication network. Miners volunteered their haulers. Trading companies offered their entire fleets. Families with private yachts signed up. Even museum ships, vessels that had been retired for decades, were pulled from storage and refitted. Captain Yuna found herself in command of the Heavy Transport Corps, coordinating thousands of civilian vessels. She was a woman who had spent 20 years flying cargo between the outer colonies. She knew logistics and she knew ship captains. When the call came, she did not hesitate. This was what humans did. They helped. The first wave of ships began arriving at Vreth Prime 3 weeks after the council meeting. Yuna led them personally, her flagship dropping out of hyperspace above a world that looked haunted. The Vreth cities below were vast and ancient, but there was a stillness to them now, a sense of ending. In the sky, their sun flickered with unnatural light, its surface already beginning to collapse. Lieutenant Bora sat at the navigation station on Yuna's ship, coordinating approach vectors for hundreds of vessels. She was young, only 26, but her mind worked like a quantum computer. She could see patterns in chaos, find paths where others saw only obstacles. Right now, she was managing an impossible dance of ships, each one needing to land, load passengers, and depart without colliding with the others. On the surface, Jiwoo met with Vreth officials. The initial meetings were tense. The Vreth had been a proud species for thousands of years. Accepting help from humans, whom many Vreth still considered primitive newcomers to the galaxy, was difficult. Some Vreth leaders even argued against the evacuation, saying their people should die with honor on their homeworld rather than flee like refugees. Jiwoo listened to all of it with patience. Then she showed them the numbers. Humanity was committing over 200,000 ships to this effort. Every available vessel. They were modifying ships that had no business carrying passengers, cramming in life support systems and sleeping pods. They were risking their crews in unstable hyperspace routes. They were doing all of this because 400 years ago, one Vreth had valued human lives enough to sacrifice himself. One by one, the Vreth officials began to cooperate. They provided their scientists data on hyperspace routes. They organized their population into evacuation zones. They prepared for the largest exodus in galactic history. Back on Earth, Tae-yang worked around the clock installing the new navigation systems on ships as they passed through refit stations. The modifications were crude and experimental. Some of them barely worked, but they worked enough. The first test run through unstable hyperspace shaved 6 days off the journey to Vreth Prime. It was dangerous. Reality bent and twisted around the ships. 3 vessels were lost, simply vanishing into dimensional tiers, but the others made it through. Daehyun watched the test results and made a decision. They would proceed. All ships would use the new routes. Losses were acceptable if it meant saving more Vreth in the long run. It was the cold math of war applied to rescue operations, and it made his stomach turn. But it was necessary. 2 months into the operation, a critical problem emerged. Bora discovered it while analyzing hyperspace stability patterns. The unstable routes they were using would only remain navigable during a rare stellar alignment. That alignment would last exactly 42 hours. After that, the routes would collapse completely, becoming too dangerous for any ship to survive. The news hit like a bomb. 42 hours. They had been planning for a 6-month operation with multiple trips. Now they had less than 2 days to evacuate everyone. It was genuinely impossible. Even with all their ships, all their preparations, they could not move 4 billion people in 42 hours. Jiwoo stood in the command center on Vreth Prime, staring at the numbers. Around her, people were already discussing retreat, talking about how they could save maybe 1 billion Vreth, perhaps 2 billion if they pushed everything to the limit. It would be the largest rescue in history. They could be proud. But Jiwoo thought about the 2 billion who would be left behind. She thought about Korath, who had not calculated acceptable losses. She thought about what it meant to honor a debt. She opened a communication channel to every human ship in the operation, thousands of captains and crew members. She told them about the 42-hour window. She told them that the mission had just become truly impossible. Then she asked them a question. Did they want to retreat and save what they could, or did they want to try saving everyone? The responses came back one by one. Ship after ship, captain after captain, mining haulers, luxury yachts, military cruisers, family transports. Every single one gave the same answer. They would save everyone or die trying. The grand chamber floated in the darkness of space, orbiting 2 bright stars that burned like golden eyes watching over the galaxy. Inside, representatives from 47 different species sat in a massive circle. Some had scales, others had fur, and a few seemed to be made of pure light. Among them sat the humans, looking small and ordinary compared to the ancient races around them. Commander Jiwoo stood near the human section, watching the proceedings with careful eyes. She had been to many council meetings before, but today felt different. The air itself seemed heavy with tension. Beside her, Ambassador Hana adjusted her formal robes and whispered that something important was about to happen. The massive doors at the chamber's entrance suddenly opened. A wave of silence swept through the room. The Vreth had arrived. Jiwoo had heard of them but never seen one in person. They were an old species, one of the first to travel between stars. The Vreth who entered now moved slowly, their tall forms draped in fading silver garments. At their center walked an elderly female, her skin like polished stone, her eyes deep and sad. This was Empress Kalinara, ruler of the Vreth civilization. Jiwoo noticed that the other council members sat up straighter, some with respect, others with curiosity. The Vreth had not attended a council meeting in over 100 years. Whatever brought them here had to be serious. The Empress moved to the center of the chamber. When she spoke, her voice was like wind through ancient caves. She explained that her people were dying. Their sun, which had burned for billions of years, was collapsing. It was happening too fast, much faster than their scientists had predicted. They had maybe 6 months before their homeworld would be destroyed. 4 billion Vreth needed to be evacuated, but their ships were gone, destroyed in a recent civil war that had torn their civilization apart. The council chamber erupted in whispers. 4 billion lives, 6 months. It was impossible. No species in the galaxy had the resources to move that many people in such a short time. The logistics alone would be a nightmare. Food, water, air, space on ships. The numbers did not work. Jiwoo felt her chest tighten. She looked at the Empress and saw genuine fear in those ancient eyes. The Vreth had been proud once, mighty and advanced. Now they stood here begging for help, and from the faces around the chamber it was clear that help would not come easily. Then the Empress did something unexpected. She turned to face the human delegation directly. Her eyes locked onto Ambassador Hana. The entire chamber went silent again, all attention shifting to the humans. The Empress spoke of something that happened 400 years ago. When humans first left their solar system, they were clumsy and inexperienced. Their ships were slow and their technology primitive compared to the rest of the galaxy. One of their colony ships, carrying thousands of sleeping humans, had stumbled into a gravitational anomaly. The ship was being pulled apart, its hull cracking, its engines failing. A Vreth explorer named Korath had been nearby. He saw the human ship dying and made a choice. He used his own ship's power core to stabilize the gravity field. It saved the humans, all of them. But Korath's ship was left powerless, drifting. By the time rescue came, Korath was dead. He had given everything to save a species he had never met before. Jiwoo felt something cold settle in her stomach. She had never heard this story. Looking around, she saw that most of the other humans in the chamber looked equally surprised. But Ambassador Hana's face had gone very still. She knew. She had known all along, the Empress continued. In Vreth culture, such a sacrifice created a debt. Not a legal obligation, but something deeper, a bond of honor that could never be erased. She was here to invoke that debt. She was asking humanity to save her people, just as Korath had saved humanity all those years ago. The chamber exploded with noise. Representatives from other species argued loudly. Some said the debt was too old to matter. Others said it was unfair to ask so much from one species. A few even laughed, saying humans could never accomplish such a feat even if they wanted to. Jiwoo watched Ambassador Hana stand slowly. The old woman moved to the center of the chamber, and despite her small size compared to many of the aliens around her, she commanded attention. Hana confirmed that the records existed. The sacrifice had been documented. The debt was real. Then Hana said something that made Jiwoo's heart skip. She said that humanity would honor the debt. They would attempt the evacuation. The chamber erupted again, but this time with disbelief and mockery. The reptilian delegate from Calmarex hissed that humans would fail and waste precious time. The crystalline beings from Shard 9 chimed in musical tones that it was mathematically impossible. Even some of the friendlier species shook their heads sadly, as if humans had just volunteered for suicide. Jiwoo found herself moving forward before she even realized what she was doing. She stepped up beside Ambassador Hana and stated clearly that she would personally oversee the operation. She would coordinate with their military strategist Dae-hyun and their best engineers. They would find a way. The Empress Kalinara stared at Jiwoo for a long moment. Then slowly the ancient being bowed her head. In Vreth culture, such a gesture was profound. It was acknowledgement of debt being honored, of trust being placed in unworthy hands made worthy by their willingness to try. As the council session ended and representatives filed out, still arguing and debating, Jiwoo stood with Ambassador Hana. The younger woman asked why they had agreed to something so impossible. Hana looked tired, but her voice was firm when she answered. She said that 400 years ago someone had chosen to save humans when it cost him everything. He had not asked if it was impossible. He had not calculated the odds. He had simply done what was right. Now it was humanity's turn to do the same. Jiwoo looked out through the transparent walls of the chamber at the stars beyond. Somewhere out there, a sun was dying. 4 billion lives hung in the balance. The galaxy thought it was impossible. Maybe it was. But as she thought about the human colony ship that had been saved by a stranger's sacrifice, she felt something settle in her chest. Humanity did not abandon its debts. They would find a way or they would die trying. Either way, they would prove that the impossible was just another challenge waiting to be overcome.